Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks everyone. Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today we finally have the continuation of our Catholicism series. Next week we will be going back into the Third Reich, and then the next week back into Catholicism. So I'm just going to kind of mix it up like that and finish out both series strong. Thank you again for all your support and everything. And if you're new here, usually I am on camera, but occasionally I like to do a different type of video where I just show things that people might want to look at, such as this great architecture from cathedrals and other things, and artwork. So usually I am on camera, just today I'm not. So with that being said, we're going to dive back into Catholicism with Martin Luther. Yes, the big divider, the one that actually split Catholicism down the middle and created what we know now as the Protestant denominations. He is the namesake of the Lutheran denomination, but really his 95 Treatises really set the standard for basically splitting the Catholic Church's power. And so with that being said, let's dive in. What you have to realize about Martin Luther, yes, all this took place way back in the 16th, 14th, 15th century, but during that time, we still had the Catholic Church basically trying to reform themselves into the old Roman Empire. In fact, this was during the heyday of what is now known as the Holy Roman Empire, overseen by an elected monarch that considered himself the Holy Roman Emperor. This whole practice was started by Charlemagne, but it was chosen by a council of noblemen from many of the affected countries that made up this region, as well as the Catholic Church, the Vatican. So this was truly them trying to reform the Roman Empire, at least the Western Roman Empire. We know the Eastern Roman Empire was still around in the form of the Byzantine Empire. But for the most part, that's the area that Martin Luther was born into. And in this area were today's countries of Poland, Germany, Austria, Hungary, basically everything in the Baltics and Eastern Western Europe, for lack of a better term, fell under this Holy Roman Empire. So there was a lot of land, and it was into this stage that Martin Luther was born. And he was born to his father, Hans Luther, and his wife, Margarethe, on November 10th, 1483, in the Holy Roman Empire. He was baptized the next morning, and basically lived in Mansfeld in the Holy Roman Empire, which would today be Germany, where his father owned leases on copper mines and smelters. So they were an upper middle class, upwardly mobile family. As with most Europeans, they were ardent Roman Catholic, and Roman Catholicism was part of their primary education. Now, many of Martin Luther's detractors would say that he was born out of wedlock and his mother was a prostitute, but we know that not to be the case. She was a homemaker and also a tradesperson herself. So he came from a very ambitious family with a lot of brothers and sisters. He was close to at least one of them by the name of Jacob Luther. But for the most part, they got sent to some of the best Catholic and Latin schools around. One of his oldest brother, Martin, became a attorney or a lawyer, um, and many of his other siblings had what would be considered professional careers of the day as well. In 1501, at age 17, Martin entered the University of Erfurt, which he later described as a party school, except he used the terms beer house and whorehouse. And so he was really kind of conflicted. He thought he would probably go into business, taking over the copper mine leases, and eventually received a master's degree from the University of Erfurt in 1505. So he was going to become an attorney, but felt that the laws of the day were rather uncertain, so he ended up dropping out of that in pretty short order. He began to have a affinity for theology and philosophy, the literary arts, and that sort of drew him into those professions. He started studying. He was deeply influenced by two of his tutors who were very, very ardent theologians, and so he decided that perhaps that was the best way he could serve his common man. But he had not quite decided to go so far as to enter the priesthood or the monastery, which actually required a whole bunch of things that you will not be able to do as opposed to things that you can do. So he was still kind of undecided and felt that maybe he could serve humanity in a more social worker kind of way. But on July 2nd, 1505, when he was leaving home and returning to his last year of school, he got into a very deadly electrical storm. And actually, a lightning bolt was said to have struck the ground near him. And of course, he was a little shaken up, and he said he cried out to Saint Anna, "Help me, and I will become a monk." And according to legend, the skies cleared, the sun showed through, and he basically told his father, "After I leave school, I am going to become a monk." And of course, his father was quite angry because he said, "Why did I even send you to college? You know, you don't need a college degree to be a monk." That kind of mirrors a lot of conversations, I'm sure, that go on in American and other households today, don't you think? So he basically joined the St. Augustinian Order of Monks. Now, the St. Augustinian Order of Monks was based on the work of course, St. Augustine. They took vows of celibacy, vows of poverty, vows of service to their fellow man, and women, I'm sure, were included in that, but back then it was fellow man for all mankind. Um, and they believed, unfortunately, these are the types of monks that you often see portrayed in movies as whipping themselves. They believe that to actually reach divine, divinity and to get to heaven, there's a whole lot of suffering that has to go into it. There were actually two schools of thought in the Augustinian order. One of them believed in a little less suffering than the other, but unfortunately for Martin Luther, he was in the sect that believed that more suffering the better. But he didn't quite buy into that. He really thought that you didn't need to suffer as much as they say you need to suffer. That all you need is a relationship with God through Jesus Christ and the saints. He was pretty clear cut and simple in Martin Luther's theology. So anyway, he joined the order, and he eventually received an official ordained bachelor's degree through his order. And his head monk, I'm not sure what you call him, I'm sure there's an official name for it, was Johann von Stupitz. And he basically grew tired of Luther's constant questions and decided to pursue tell him to pursue more academic work and more social work to basically shut Luther up. So he was officially ordained an official teacher on April 3rd, 1507, and basically was ordered to start teaching other theological students at the University of Wittenberg. By 1508, he had received at least 2 bachelor's degrees in theology and science, and was eventually awarded by 1512 his doctorate of theology, and was basically had a great career ahead of him of teaching other seminary students and monks. And he would spend primarily the rest of his career at the University of Wittenberg as a teacher. Then enter 1516, when the Catholic Church decided that there was a lot of industrious ways to fill the coffers of the Vatican, and that was to sell something known as indulgences. A Dominican friar by the name of Johann Tetzel was said to be one of the first Vatican officials sent to Germany to sell these indulgences to raise money to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And basically, what is an indulgence? An indulgence is something of religious significance blessed by somebody in the church that has some sort of great, I hate to use the word significance again, significance to Catholics. It could be this piece of wood came from the cross, this piece of rock came from the stone that was in front of the tomb. It could even just be an article from the Pope's robes, and there's a lot of articles of clothing there that was blessed by someone of significance. And if you bought these and they were sold for a pretty penny, basically rich people could receive atonement for their sins, and they could even buy a dead relative or friend out of purgatory, and they would go immediately to heaven. Now, Luther wrote his bishop at the time, a man by the name of Albrecht von Brandenburg, protesting against these indulgences. He basically put what was the early version of the 95 Theses, his whole long list of problems with the Catholic Church that he nailed to the cathedral wall or the cathedral door. Basically shouting out the fact that selling of indulgences was unethical, it was wrong, and it was completely against biblical principles, which says all you have to do is have faith and believe in Jesus Christ. A very simple theology, and that what you do on the earth has little bearing on whether you make it to heaven. That's what it pretty much all boiled down to, and that this was just a way to extort money out of the very rich for church works. And of course, as supervisors who don't want to be bothered he pretty much did not respond to Luther at all. So Luther took things into his own hands. On October 31st, 1517, he nailed the 95 Theses to the door of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, and it started a ruckus. If there had been social media in the day, this would have been all over the world in minutes, but it took on that same effect, and by late 1517, early 1518, the Theses had spread all over the Holy Roman Empire and into other parts of Europe as well, and caused quite a stink. He continued to lecture at the University of Wittenberg, and lectured on the very premises that he had put into the 95 Theses. So from 1517, 1518 to 1520, he was lecturing and teaching theology students about justification by faith alone, that all these vows of poverty and celibacy that they required priests and monks to take were butkus, didn't mean a thing. He ended up getting married. I believe she was a former nun. So yeah, he was just pretty much taking a crap on everything that the current Pope said. And so basically the papacy tried to just sweep the 95 Theses under the rug and contain it, but it was spreading far and wide, and a lot of people agreed with it, particularly with the fact that you could not read, the scriptures yourself. You had to rely on somebody from the Catholic Church to read that to you, i.e. your priest or a pope or the pope or a cardinal or a bishop to read that to you. And also just the selling of indulgences. That was a huge thing because the poor people felt slighted. I can't afford to buy my way into heaven or somebody out of purgatory. And the rich even started to feel a little bit taken upon, because when they heard what Luther was teaching and read what Luther was teaching, they realized that, yeah, that's correct. It's only by faith. I mean, that's the way it should be. Pope Leo X, who was the current pope, said that he had dealt with heretics before and would deal with Luther in kind. He figured, how do you take care of a troublesome monk? You threaten to excommunicate him and therefore taking away his job, his home, and everything else. So on June 15th, 1520, he warned Luther that if he did not withdraw his support of his 95 Theses, he should say he had prayed about it and realized he was wrong and the Catholic Church was right. If he did not do that within 60 days, he would be excommunicated and pretty much lose his job and his everything, including his soul. Of course, he threatened him with that. But basically, Luther just continued to teach. He wrote more books and more literature on his way of thinking, and by January 1521, Pope Leo officially excommunicated Martin Luther, basically ripped him of his collar, his frock, everything. But however, there was still the problem that because he was now deemed a heretic, and they had not been able to handle this internally, it was now thrown to the government of the Holy Roman Empire, which was at that time led by Charles V of Spain, who was a grandson of Ferdinand and Isabel, and was nephew of Catherine of Aragon, who was the first wife of Henry VIII, and you'll see him come into play when we get to the Tudors. He was currently sitting on the throne as Holy Roman Emperor, and of course, because this threatened his power, he was very, very upset with Martin Luther and said he should be killed as a heretic. But Luther had very rich supporters, a lot of supporters among the normal working class people, and so they feared a rebellion if they did anything with this troublesome monk. So they called what is now known as the Diet of Worms, and that is not where they forced him to eat worms. It was just, Diet was basically an inquiry, and Worms was a city in which it was held, and it was held on April 18th, 1521. It was basically a public trial for heresy. Basically, the Catholic Church said Luther was bad and his theses were bad, and so now the secular government, i.e. the Holy Roman Empire, needs to try it to see if he should be executed. But he had very powerful friends and had basically gotten an agreement from Charles V that no hair on Luther's head would be harmed and that he would have safe passage to and from the trial. And so with the commencement of the Diet of Worms, you had Emperor Charles V himself presiding. You had some of the princes of some of the Germanic provinces also there, and basically one of the archbishops, the Archbishop of Trier, also. And basically, during this trial that went on for months, you had Luther defending himself through theology and scripture, as well as basically the Catholic Church trying to tear it down. So basically what you had here is the Catholic Church, okay, they're in danger of losing everything if all of his ideas catch on, and also the Holy Roman Empire, because they rule by edicts to the Catholic Church. Emperor Charles V kind of had a problem with his whole empire could fall, and then you had the danger to the other monarchies around Europe that also ruled by grace of the Catholic Church. So no one liked Martin Luther, let's just say that. So in the end, he was declared an outlaw. Everything he was written was banned, and they wanted to arrest him and imprison him basically on the equivalent of house arrest. And his fate would totally be in their hands. They made it a crime for anybody to give him lodging or food, but he could also not be killed. So Charles V, who had promised him safe passage, kept his word, but he also decided he was going to make it very, very hard for Martin Luther to ever live any sort of a life. And Luther decided to return to Wittenberg. Frederick III, who was one of the princes of Germany that sat on, of the Germanic provinces that had sat on the Diet of Worms council, had him kidnapped on his way back to Wittenberg. He had some people dress up as thieves and criminals and kidnap him, delivering him to him He was imprisoned at Warburg Castle at Eisenach, which was in Prince Frederick's province. And for many years, he lived there as kind of a prisoner, a house arrest kind of prisoner. Charles V did nothing to free him, of course. They just wanted him out of his way. They went through all of Europe trying to burn everything he'd ever written. But while he was in exile, pretty much, and he called this his Patmos, referring to John the Revelator, he translated the New Testament from Greek into German so that the common person could read it. He also wrote many other academic papers and somehow smuggled them out. And so he continued right down his path of bringing religion in by faith and bringing religion to the common person while under house arrest. After being released and returning to Wittenberg, he continued writing. He also became kind of the figurehead of what would be a very minor revolt by the average person against their overlords. He did speak out against the rebellion, saying we shouldn't go this far, we shouldn't do this, but we should do what we need to bring religion and God to the masses. He basically helped quell that uprising. It was around this time he did marry to Catherine von Bora, one of 12 nuns that had helped him get out of his exile, and basically ended up moving into a former monastery known as the Black Cloister that was a wedding gift from a wealthy benefactor, and had 6 children with varied results. So he had a couple of them that died in childhood, but and she would eventually die very early as well. So it was kind of a sad personal life for Martin Luther. But while there, he found himself organizing his followers into basically what would become the Lutheran Church and the first church of Protestantism. He began to translate more of the scripture into readable German for the people. He developed his own catechisms, catechism is kind of lessons that lots of Catholic children are taught and they have to read. So he came up with his own catechisms for followers of his religion, and eventually finished his entire translation of the New Testament and completed the Old Testament translation in 1534, as well as with followers developed his own hymnals. So basically you had the formation of the Protestant church and everything that goes along with the Protestant church. Able to read your own scriptures. Faith is all that matters. You don't go into purgatory. You go into either heaven or hell. So basically, he laid the groundwork for everything Protestant, and he is one of the causes of the great rift and the great split of the Catholic Church into other churches. He was not the first reformer. There were other people involved in the Reformation that had their own beliefs, but Luther is the one we know because he was kind of the public's favorite. And so I hope you enjoyed this very brief overview of Martin Luther, and I'll see you very soon with another video. And until next time, keep on crying.